Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. The third floor was supposed to be empty. The ceiling fan was spinning lazily above me when I heard it for the first time. A single deliberate footstep directly overhead. I froze, staring up at the plaster ceiling, watching dust motes drift through the moonlight. Another step, then another. Slow, measured, like someone pacing. But the third floor was sealed, had been for decades. At least that's what I'd been told. I'd moved into the old Victorian on Ashwood Street 6 months earlier, drawn in by the high ceilings, the original hardwood floors, and a rent that seemed too good to be true in this neighborhood. The landlord, Mr. Brennan, was an older guy who'd inherited the property from his parents. When I asked about the third floor during the walkthrough, he'd waved it off dismissively. Water damage from a burst pipe back in the 80s, he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. Whole floor's a mess, not worth the cost to renovate. I sealed the stairwell years ago. I'd glanced at the door at the end of the second floor hallway, painted over, a heavy padlock securing it. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I didn't think about it again. The second floor was more than enough space for me, and the price was right. I signed the lease that afternoon. The first few months were perfect. The neighborhood was quiet, my apartment was cozy, and I'd finally started to feel settled after years of bouncing between cramped studios and terrible roommates. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant I spent most of my time at home, and I loved the solitude. The old house had its quirks. The radiator clanked, the pipes groaned, the floors creaked when you walked. But nothing that bothered me. Old houses make noise. I'd grown up in one. The footsteps started in early November, right around the time the weather turned cold. I'd gone to bed around midnight, read for a while, then turned off the light. I was just drifting off when I heard it, a soft thud from directly above my bedroom. Not the settling of old wood or the expansion of pipes. A footstep, distinct, deliberate. I lay there in the dark, listening. Nothing. Just the wind rattling the windows and the distant hum of traffic. I told myself I'd imagined it, that I was half asleep and my brain was playing tricks. I rolled over and tried to sleep, but it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning, always the same pattern. A few slow, heavy steps, then silence. Sometimes it sounded like someone was walking across the floor, other times like they were just standing there, shifting their weight from foot to foot. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settle, especially when the temperature drops. Pipes expand and contract. Maybe there were animals up there, raccoons or squirrels that had gotten in through a damaged roof. But animals don't walk with the measured, deliberate rhythm of a person. And the third floor was supposed to be sealed. After about a week of sleepless nights, I went down to the end of the hallway and examined the door to the third floor. The padlock was rusted but secure, the door painted shut. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Nothing. Just silence, and the faint smell of old wood and dust. I knocked, feeling ridiculous. No response. That night I heard the footsteps again, but this time they were different. Instead of pacing, they moved in a straight line across the ceiling, from one end of the third floor to the other. And then they stopped. Directly above my bed, I stared up at the ceiling, my heart hammering. I could feel someone up there. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew. The house felt different when it happened. The air thicker, the silence more oppressive. I waited, barely breathing, and then I heard it. A soft creak like someone kneeling down, and then nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, telling myself I'd call the landlord in the morning. But when morning came and the sun was streaming through the windows, it seemed absurd. What was I going to say? That I heard footsteps in a sealed-off floor. He'd think I was losing it. I almost thought I was losing it. But the footsteps continued, every night, always between 2 and 3. And they were getting closer to the edge of the ceiling, right above where I slept. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, as far from the bedroom as I could get. It didn't help. I could still hear them, muffled but present. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night. I tried researching the house's history online, looking for anything that might explain what I was hearing. The property records were sparse. The house had been built in 1897, passed through a few families, then bought by the Brennan family in the 50s. I found an old newspaper article from 1982 about a fire in a house 2 blocks away, but nothing about my building. No deaths, no tragedies, nothing that would explain why I felt like I was living under someone's feet. I thought about breaking into the 3rd floor myself, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the weight of the padlock, the layers of old paint sealing the door shut. Or maybe it was the growing certainty that I didn't want to know what was up there. Because whatever it was, it knew I was below it. And it was waiting. 3 weeks after the footsteps started, something changed. I was lying in my bed. I'd forced myself to sleep there again, refusing to let fear drive me out of my own room, when I heard the familiar sound overhead. But this time, the footsteps didn't stop at the usual place. They kept moving, crossing the ceiling until they were directly above me, and then they stopped. I held my breath, staring up into the darkness. And then I felt it, a faint sprinkle of something landing on my face. Dust. Old, fine dust, drifting down from a crack in the plaster I'd never noticed before. My skin prickled. I didn't move. I didn't dare. The footsteps shifted. 1 step closer to the edge of the ceiling, another sprinkle of dust, and then so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. Someone was standing directly above me, listening. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second I was frozen in bed, the next I was scrambling out from under the covers, stumbling into the hallway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn on the lights. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for the sound of footsteps descending a staircase that was supposed to be sealed. They never came. The next morning I called Mr. Brennan. My voice was shaking when I told him I needed to see the 3rd floor. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed. "There's nothing up there," he said. "Just rot and old furniture, I told you." "I've been hearing footsteps," I interrupted, "every night for almost a month. Someone is up there." Another long pause. Then, "I'll come by tomorrow." He showed up the next afternoon with a crowbar and a flashlight, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He didn't say much as he pried the padlock off and shouldered the door open, the old paint cracking and flaking away. The staircase beyond was narrow and dark, the air stale and thick with dust. "Stay here," he said, but I followed him anyway. I had to know. The 3rd floor was worse than I'd imagined. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards warped and stained, the windows boarded up. It smelled like rot and time, like a place that had been abandoned and forgotten. Mr. Brennan swept his flashlight across the room, illuminating piles of old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked against the walls, the skeletal remains of a life left behind. "See," he said, "nothing." But I wasn't looking at the furniture. I was looking at the floor. At the path through the dust, a clear, deliberate trail of footprints leading from the stairs to the far corner of the room. And then back again. Over and over like someone had been pacing. Recently. Mr. Brennan saw them too. His face went pale. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. We both stood there staring at the footprints, and I realized they led to the spot directly above my bedroom, directly above my bed. We left the third floor without another word. Mr. Brennan locked the door again, but we both knew it didn't matter. The lock hadn't stopped whatever was up there before. I moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't tell my friends why, didn't tell my family. How do you explain that you were being watched from a floor that wasn't supposed to exist, that every night something walked above you, listening to you breathe, waiting for something you couldn't name? I still think about those footprints, about the dust falling onto my face, about the sound of breathing in the dark. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear a soft creak above me and I freeze, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it followed me, wondering if it's still listening. Story 2. My parents left for the weekend. The night my parents left, I felt like I'd finally made it. 16 years old. The whole house to myself, no rules, no curfew, no annoying check-ins every hour. Just me, a fridge full of pizza rolls, and 2 days of absolute freedom. I'd been begging them for this for months, and they'd finally caved. My older brother Kyle had moved out for college 2 years ago, and I'd proven, at least in their minds, that I was responsible enough to handle a weekend alone. They left Friday afternoon. My mom hugged me 3 times, made me promise I'd lock all the doors, and left a list of emergency numbers on the fridge like I was 12. My dad just nodded and said, "Don't burn the house down." And then they were gone, headed to some bed and breakfast in the mountains for their anniversary. I watched their car disappear down the street, waited until I couldn't see the taillights anymore, then locked the door and cranked up the music. This was going to be the best weekend of my life. Friday night was perfect. I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing video games, ate an entire frozen pizza by myself, and didn't clean up a single dish. I fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on, feeling like the king of my own castle. Saturday was more of the same. I slept until noon, made myself a ridiculous breakfast of leftover pizza and energy drinks, and spent the afternoon in the backyard with a basketball, pretending I was good enough to go pro. The house felt bigger when I was alone in it. Emptier, but in a good way. Like it was all mine. It wasn't until Saturday night that things started to feel wrong. I'd gone to bed around midnight, tired from doing absolutely nothing all day. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't notice when other people are around. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, the creak of the floorboards when I walked to the bathroom. I told myself it was normal. Houses make noise, especially old ones like ours. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. The basement door creaking open. I froze, staring at the ceiling, my heart suddenly loud in my ears. The basement door was at the end of the first floor hallway, just below my bedroom. I knew that sound. It had a distinctive low groan because the hinges needed oil. My dad had been meaning to fix it for months. I lay there listening, nothing else, just the sound of the door settling on its hinges. I told myself I'd probably left it open earlier, maybe when I'd grabbed a soda from the extra fridge we kept down there. I didn't remember opening it, but I'd been distracted, half watching a game on my phone. It was possible. But something made me get out of bed and check. I crept down the hallway, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. The basement door was open. Not all the way, just a few inches, enough to see the darkness beyond. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I was sure I'd closed it. I always closed it. My parents were strict about that. The basement was unfinished, full of old storage boxes and my dad's tools, and the door had a tendency to swing open on its own if you didn't latch it properly. I pulled it shut, heard the latch click into place, and tested it. Secure. I went back to bed, telling myself I'd just forgotten. An hour later, I heard it again. The creak of the door opening, This time I didn't hesitate. I got up, went downstairs, and found the basement door standing open again. Wider this time, almost like someone had pushed it. I stood there in the hallway, staring down into the darkness, my pulse hammering. The basement light switch was at the top of the stairs, just inside the doorway. I reached around the frame and flipped it on, and the staircase flooded with harsh yellow light. I could see the concrete floor below, the water heater in the corner, the stacks of boxes along the far wall. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I pulled the door shut again, harder this time, and made sure the latch was secure. Then I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob. If the latch was broken, if the door was swinging open on its own, the chair would stop it. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there listening, waiting for the sound of the door creaking open again. But it didn't come. Just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that made the house feel too big and too empty. Sunday morning, I went downstairs and found the chair exactly where I'd left it. The door was still closed. I felt ridiculous. I'd probably just not latched it properly the first time, and my paranoia had done the rest. I moved the chair back to the kitchen and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt different, like I wasn't alone in it anymore. I spent Sunday trying to distract myself, cleaning up the mess I'd made, doing the dishes, putting things back the way my parents had left them. I kept glancing at the basement door, making sure it was still closed. It was, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That afternoon, I went down to the basement to grab a soda from the fridge. I didn't want to. Every instinct I had told me to stay upstairs, to leave the basement alone. But I forced myself to go, to prove that I wasn't scared of my own house. The basement was cold and damp the way it always was. The single bulb overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. I walked quickly to the fridge, grabbed a soda, and turned to leave. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Wet footprints on the concrete, leading from the far corner of the basement to the bottom of the stairs, and then stopping. I stood there, frozen, staring at them. They were fresh. I could see the water still glistening on the floor. But there was nothing in the basement that would leave wet footprints. No leaks, no spills, nothing. And they were too big to be mine, too big to be my mom's or my dad's. I didn't go any closer. I didn't investigate. I just turned around, walked up the stairs as calmly as I could manage, and closed the basement door behind me. Then I locked it. Then I shoved the chair back under the doorknob. Then I went to my room and locked that door too. I didn't leave my room for the rest of the day. I sat on my bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the door, listening for any sound from downstairs. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I say? That I'd seen wet footprints? That the basement door kept opening? They'd think I was being paranoid or trying to get them to come home early. The footsteps came that night, not from the basement, from the first floor right below my room. Slow, deliberate, moving through the hallway, across the living room into the kitchen. And then they stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, clutching my phone, waiting for the sound of footsteps on the stairs, for my bedroom door to open, for something to happen. But nothing did. The house fell silent again, and I sat there until the sun came up, too terrified to move. My parents came home Sunday evening. I heard their car pull into the driveway, heard the front door open, heard my mom calling my name. I came downstairs trying to act normal, trying to smile. They asked me how the weekend was. I told them it was fine. Great, even. I didn't tell them about the basement door, about the wet footprints, about the footsteps I'd heard walking through the house while I hid in my room. I didn't tell them that I'd checked the locks on every window and door 3 times before they got home, Or that I'd found the basement door standing wide open Sunday morning, the chair kicked aside. I never stayed home alone again. Not for a weekend, not for a night, not even for a few hours. And whenever I walk past the basement door, I make sure it's closed, latched, locked. Because I know what's down there now. I know it can get out. And I know it was waiting for me to be alone. Story 3. Someone was using my shower after my divorce. I needed a fresh start. Not just emotionally, physically. I couldn't stay in the house Derek and I had shared for 8 years. Couldn't walk past the bedroom where we'd slept. Couldn't sit in the kitchen where we'd had our last fight. So I found a rental on the other side of town. A small 2-bedroom house with a fenced backyard and neighbors I'd never have to talk to if I didn't want to. It was perfect. Quiet. Private. Exactly what I needed to rebuild. The landlord was a woman named Mrs. Kowalski, probably in her 70s, who'd owned the property for decades. She'd rented it out to a young couple before me, but they'd moved suddenly. Job transfer, she said, something out of state. The house had been empty for a month before I signed the lease. She gave me 2 keys, showed me where the water heater was, and told me to call if I needed anything. Then she left me alone. I moved in on a Saturday in early March. It didn't take long. Most of the furniture had been Derek's, and I'd only kept what I could fit in my sedan. A bed, a couch, some kitchen supplies, a few boxes of clothes. I spent the weekend unpacking, arranging things in a way that felt like mine and not ours, trying to convince myself that starting over wasn't the same as giving up. The first few weeks were fine. Better than fine, actually. I loved the solitude. I'd wake up early, make coffee in the quiet kitchen, sit in the backyard, and listen to the birds. I worked as a medical transcriptionist, which meant I could do my job from home, and the little house became my sanctuary. No arguments, no tension, no tiptoeing around someone else's mood. Just me. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was mid-April. I'd been at the house for about 6 weeks, settling into a routine. I came home from a rare in-person meeting at the clinic around 4 in the afternoon, exhausted and ready to collapse on the couch. I dropped my bag by the door and headed to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror was fogged. I stopped in the doorway, staring at it. The glass was covered in a thin layer of condensation, the kind you get after a hot shower. But I hadn't showered that morning. I'd been running late and had just thrown on some clothes and left. I reached out and touched the mirror. It was damp, still warm. I told myself it was condensation from the temperature difference, that maybe the bathroom had poor ventilation and the moisture was just lingering. I wiped the mirror down with a towel and didn't think about it again, but it kept happening. At first, it was just the mirror. Then I started noticing the shower walls were damp when I got home from errands, little beads of water clinging to the tiles. The bath mat would be slightly displaced, like someone had stepped on it. Once, I found the shampoo bottle moved from the caddy to the edge of the tub. I started making mental notes before I left the house. I'd check the bathroom, make sure everything was dry, take a picture on my phone of where things were, and every time I came home, something was different. The shower curtain would be pulled closed when I'd left it open. The soap would be in a different spot. The bathroom would smell faintly of steam, of something floral I didn't recognize. I thought maybe I was losing my mind. The divorce had been brutal, and I'd spent the last few months in a fog of stress and insomnia. Maybe I was just forgetting things, misplacing objects, imagining patterns where there were none. I made an appointment with my doctor, asked if stress could cause memory problems. She said it could, prescribed me some sleeping pills, and told me to take it easy. But the sleeping pills didn't help. Because the problem wasn't in my head. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early May when I found the hair. I'd come home early from a grocery run, my arms full of bags, and headed straight to the kitchen. After I'd put everything away, I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. That's when I saw it. A long, dark strand of hair caught in the shower drain. I stood there staring at it, my heart starting to pound. My hair is blonde, shoulder-length fine, the kind that doesn't shed much. This hair was dark brown, almost black and thick. It definitely wasn't mine. I pulled it out of the drain with shaking hands, held it up to the light. It was real, it was recent, and it meant someone had been in my shower. I checked every window in the house, they were all locked. I checked the doors, front and back, both secure, no signs of forced entry. I called Mrs. Kowalski and asked if anyone else had a key to the house. She said no, just me and her, and she hadn't been by in weeks. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say that someone was getting into my house, using my shower, moving my things, but it sounded insane. I had no proof, just a fogged mirror, damp tiles, and a strand of hair that didn't belong to me. "Everything's fine," I said, "just checking." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the house. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the pipes groan, the sound of water running through the walls. And then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of the shower turning on. I bolted upright, my heart slamming in my chest. The bathroom was just down the hall from my bedroom, and I could see the light was off. But I could hear it. The steady hiss of water hitting tile, the occasional splash as someone moved under the stream. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and crept into the hallway. The bathroom door was closed. I could see steam seeping out from the crack beneath it, curling into the hallway like fingers. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of someone showering in my house, in my bathroom while I was home. And then the water shut off. I ran. I don't know why I didn't call the police, why I didn't scream or grab a weapon or do anything rational. I just ran to my bedroom, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. I sat on my bed with the phone in my hand, waiting for the sound of footsteps in the hallway. For the door to rattle. For something to happen. But nothing did. The house fell silent, and I sat there until dawn, too terrified to move. The next morning I checked the bathroom. It was dry. The mirror wasn't fogged, the shower wasn't damp, the bath mat was exactly where I'd left it. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed the whole thing, but then I saw it. A single damp footprint on the tile floor just outside the shower. Bare, slightly smaller than mine, still wet. I called a locksmith that afternoon and had every lock in the house changed. It cost me $300 I didn't have, but I didn't care. I installed a deadbolt on the bathroom door, bought a security camera for the hallway, and started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. For a few days, everything was quiet. The bathroom stayed dry, the mirror stayed clear. Nothing moved. I started to think maybe changing the locks had worked, that whoever had been getting in didn't have access anymore. But then I checked the security camera footage. It was from 3 nights after I'd installed it. I fast-forwarded through hours of empty hallway, watching myself walk past the camera on my way to the kitchen, to the bathroom, to bed. And then, at 2:47 a.m., the bathroom door opened. No one walked out. The door just opened, slowly, on its own. Steam poured into the hallway, thick and white, and I could hear the faint sound of the shower running. The camera's audio picked it up, the hiss of water, the creak of pipes, and underneath it something else, humming, soft, tuneless, like someone lost in thought. The door stayed open for almost 10 minutes, and then it closed just as slowly as it had opened. The steam dissipated, the humming stopped, and the hallway was empty again. I watched that footage 5 times, my hands shaking, my mind trying to rationalize what I was seeing. But there was no rational explanation, no trick of the light, no glitch in the camera, no way to explain how the shower was running and the door was opening when I was asleep in the next room and no one else was in the house. I moved out the next day. I didn't pack carefully, didn't take everything, just grabbed what I needed and left. I called Mrs. Kowalski from my car and told her I was breaking the lease. She asked why, and I told her the truth, that someone was getting into the house, that I'd seen it on camera, that I didn't feel safe. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said quietly, "The couple before you, they said the same thing." I never went back. I left the keys in the mailbox and never asked for my deposit back. I don't know what was in that house and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I catch a whiff of something floral in my new apartment and I freeze. I check the bathroom, make sure the mirror isn't fogged, make sure the shower is dry. And I wonder if it followed me, or if it's still there waiting for the next person to move in. Story 4. The voicemail started. After I changed the locks, I bought my first house last spring. A modest 2-bedroom fixer-upper in a quiet suburb about 20 minutes outside the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. After years of renting overpriced apartments and dealing with nightmare landlords, I finally had a place I could settle into. Something I could make my own. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, had passed away a few months earlier, and her kids were selling the property as is. I got it for a steal. The house needed work, outdated appliances, peeling wallpaper, a backyard that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But I didn't care. I had plans. I spent the first few weeks painting walls, replacing light fixtures, ripping up old carpet. It felt good, productive, like I was building something real. One of the first things I did, though, was change the locks. I'm careful like that. I don't care how trustworthy the previous owners were or how many keys they claim to have accounted for. When you move into a new place, you change the locks. It's just common sense. So I hired a locksmith, had him replace the deadbolts on the front and back doors, and pocketed the new keys with a sense of satisfaction. The house was officially mine now. Secured. That night I got my first voicemail. It came in around 11:30 p.m. I was sitting on the couch, exhausted from a day of unpacking, half watching some show I wasn't really paying attention to. My phone buzzed with a notification, voicemail from an unknown number. I frowned. I hadn't heard it ring, and the number wasn't one I recognized. Probably a spam call, I figured, or a wrong number. I played the message. It was just breathing. Slow, steady, deliberate. No words. No background noise, just the sound of someone inhaling and exhaling for about 15 seconds. Then a click, and the call ended. I deleted it and went to bed. Weird, but not worth worrying about. People pocket dial all the time, but the calls kept coming. Every night, always around the same time, between 11 p.m. and midnight, always from an unknown number, and always the same thing. Breathing, silence, then a click. After the third night, I started getting annoyed. I tried blocking the numbers, but they kept changing. I tried not answering at all, letting every call go to voicemail, but they just left the same message. Breathing, silence, click. I thought about changing my number, but that felt like overkill. It was probably just some creep with too much time on their hands, some random person who'd gotten my number from a data leak or something. Annoying, but harmless. And then the messages changed. It was about a week after the calls started. I was sitting at my kitchen table eating a late dinner and scrolling through my phone when another voicemail came in. I almost didn't listen to it. I was so used to the pattern by now that I'd started just deleting them without checking. But something made me hit play. This time there was a voice. Quiet, raspy, barely more than a whisper. Amber. My name. They said my name. I dropped my fork, my heart suddenly pounding. I replayed the message, turning the volume all the way up. It was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Amber. Just my name. Nothing else. And then the click. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it. How did they know my name? My number wasn't listed anywhere public. I'd been careful about that, and even if they'd gotten my number somehow, how would they know who I was? The next night, the message was longer. Amber, I'm glad you changed the locks. My blood ran cold. I listened to it 3 times, my hands shaking. The voice was the same, quiet, raspy, almost amused. And the words didn't make sense. Why would they be glad I changed the locks? Who even knew I'd done that? I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That someone was leaving me weird voicemails? That they knew my name and knew I'd changed my locks? It wasn't illegal, it wasn't even really threatening, just disturbing. The messages kept coming. Every night a new one, each slightly more unsettling than the last. You look tired today. I like what you did with the living room. You should close the blinds when you're changing. That last one made me feel sick. I checked every window in the house, made sure the blinds were drawn, the curtains pulled tight. I started keeping my phone on silent, stopping myself from checking the voicemails even though I knew they were there, piling up, waiting for me. But I couldn't help myself. Every morning I'd listen to the one from the night before, my stomach twisting as the voice described things only someone watching me would know. What I'd eaten for dinner. What time I'd come home from work. The fact that I'd forgotten to lock the back door on Tuesday. I installed a security system. Cameras on the front and back doors, motion sensors in the yard, an alarm that would go off if anyone tried to break in. I checked the footage obsessively, scanning for any sign of someone lurking outside, watching my house. But there was nothing. Just empty streets, quiet nights, the occasional car passing by. The voicemails didn't stop. Nice cameras, very thorough. You know they won't help, right? I'm glad you're taking this seriously. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the house, waiting for the sound of footsteps or a door opening or something. My phone would light up around 11:30 every night, and I'd watch the notification appear, voicemail from unknown number, and I'd lie there, too scared to listen, too scared not to. 2 weeks after the calls started, the message that finally broke me came through. I still have a key, you know. You can change the locks all you want, but I made copies, lots of copies, and you'll never know which one still works. I called the police that night. I played them the voicemails, showed them the timestamps, explained everything. The officer who came to my house was polite but skeptical. He asked if I had any ex-boyfriends, anyone who might have a grudge, anyone I'd had a falling out with. I said no. He took notes, told me to keep a record of the calls, said they'd look into it. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't think this was urgent. Just some prank caller, probably. They never found out who was calling. The numbers were all from burner phones, untraceable. The voicemails kept coming even after I changed my number. Even after I installed more cameras, more locks, a full alarm system that would alert me if a door or window so much as budged. The last voicemail I got was 3 weeks ago. I'm not coming in, Amber, not yet. I just want you to know I could. Anytime. And you'd never know until it was too late. I don't live in that house anymore. I moved out last month, left most of my things behind, and rented an apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I got a new phone, a new number, changed every password I had. I even dyed my hair, cut it short, started using a different name at coffee shops. But last night my phone buzzed with a notification, a voicemail from an unknown number. I haven't listened to it yet. I don't know if I will, because part of me already knows what it's going to say, that they found me, that they know where I am, and that changing the locks, changing my number, changing my entire life, it doesn't matter. They'll always have a key. Story 5. I set up cameras to catch a burglar. It started small, so small I thought I was imagining it. A coffee mug I could have sworn I'd left on the counter, now sitting in the sink. A book moved from the nightstand to the living room table. Little things, forgettable things, the kind of stuff you chalk up to exhaustion or distraction. But then food started disappearing from my fridge. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. I'd been there for almost 2 years, working from home as a software developer, and I liked the routine, the solitude. I'm the kind of person who notices patterns, who keeps things organized. So when I opened the fridge one morning and realized an entire Tupperware of leftovers was missing, leftovers I'd specifically been looking forward to eating for lunch, I knew something was off. I checked the trash, thinking maybe I'd thrown it out in a moment of absent-mindedness. Nothing. I looked in the cabinets, the pantry, even the freezer, like maybe I'd put it there by mistake, but it was just gone, and I knew I hadn't eaten it. Over the next week, it kept happening. A pack of string cheese I'd bought 2 days earlier, gone. Half a loaf of bread, a container of yogurt. Not big things, not stuff that would make me panic, but enough to make me uneasy. I started keeping a mental inventory every time I left the apartment, checking what was in the fridge before I went to bed and again when I woke up. Stuff kept disappearing. I thought maybe I had a weird memory problem. Maybe I was sleepwalking and eating in the middle of the night without realizing it. But I'd never had that issue before, and besides, I'd wake up feeling completely unrested if that were the case. I felt fine, just confused and increasingly paranoid. I started thinking someone had a key to my apartment. Maybe the landlord or a maintenance worker. Maybe someone from the previous tenant's life who'd never given their key back. It sounded crazy, but it was the only explanation that made sense. So I called the landlord and asked if anyone else had access to my apartment. "Just you and me," he said, sounding annoyed that I'd even asked. Why? I didn't tell him the truth. I just said I was being cautious, wanted to make sure my place was secure. He grumbled something about changing the locks if I wanted, but I'd have to pay for it. I said I'd think about it. Instead, I bought security cameras. Cheap ones, the kind you can set up yourself and monitor from an app on your phone. I installed 2, one in the living room pointed at the front door and one in the kitchen angled toward the fridge and the hallway that led to my bedroom. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it, I just wanted to know. The first night, nothing happened. I checked the footage the next morning, just me moving around the apartment, making dinner, sitting on the couch with my laptop. Normal, boring, exactly what I expected. The second night was the same, and the third. I started to think I'd wasted my money, that maybe I really was just forgetting things or misplacing them. Maybe I'd been stressed and wasn't paying attention. But I kept the cameras running just in case. On the 4th night, I saw it. I woke up around 7 in the morning, groggy and half awake, and opened the app on my phone to check the footage like I'd been doing every day. I fast-forwarded through the evening, me eating dinner, watching TV, brushing my teeth, heading to bed around 11 p.m. The apartment was dark, quiet, nothing moved. And then at 3:14 a.m. I saw myself. I froze, staring at the screen. The camera in the living room had captured me walking out of my bedroom, moving slowly through the hallway, into the kitchen. I was wearing the same pajamas I'd gone to bed in. My movements were slow, deliberate, like I was half asleep. I opened the fridge, pulled something out, and stood there for a moment, just staring at it. Then I closed the fridge and walked back to my bedroom. I sat there, my heart pounding, watching myself disappear down the hallway. I had no memory of that. None. I'd slept through the entire night without waking up once, or at least I thought I had. I rewound the footage and watched it again, trying to remember, but there was nothing. No memory of getting up, no memory of opening the fridge, no memory of eating anything. It was like watching a stranger. I told myself it was sleepwalking, that I'd gotten up in the middle of the night and just didn't remember. It was unsettling, but it explained the missing food. Maybe I'd been doing this for weeks without realizing it. But something about the footage bothered me. The way I moved, the way I stood there in the kitchen just staring at the fridge. It didn't look like sleepwalking. It looked like I was awake, like I was thinking. That night I forced myself to go to bed at the same time, around 11 p.m. I set an alarm for 3 a.m., determined to catch myself if I got up again. I needed to know. The alarm went off at 3. I woke up groggy, disoriented, but I was in bed. I hadn't moved. I checked my phone, opened the camera app, and pulled up the live feed. My bedroom door was open. I stared at the screen, my blood turning cold. I'd closed that door before going to bed. I always closed it. And now it was standing wide open, the hallway beyond dark and empty. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the phone, waiting for something to happen. And then I heard it, soft, barely audible over the hum of the fridge, but unmistakable. Footsteps in the kitchen. I switched to the kitchen camera feed, and that's when I saw it. There was something in the kitchen, not me, not a person exactly. Just a shape, standing in the corner by the fridge, just outside the camera's full view. I could see the edge of it, dark, shifting, breathing. And it was watching the hallway, watching my bedroom door. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, watching this thing stand there, motionless, waiting. And then it turned, not toward the camera, but toward the hallway, toward me. And I realized it knew I was awake. It knew I was watching. I don't remember what happened next. I think I screamed. I think I threw the phone across the room and scrambled out of bed, slamming the bedroom door shut and locking it. I shoved my dresser in front of it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely move. And then I sat there, pressed against the wall, listening. The footsteps moved through the apartment, slow, deliberate, coming closer. They stopped outside my bedroom door. I could hear breathing on the other side, low and steady, and then a soft knock. 3 times. Like it was asking permission to come in. I called 911. I don't know what I said, just that someone was in my apartment, that I needed help, that I was locked in my bedroom. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, told me to stay where I was, that officers were on their way. The footsteps moved away from the door, back down the hallway, into the kitchen. And then silence. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found the front door unlocked. The apartment was empty. The cameras showed me going to bed, showed me waking up at 3 a.m., showed me checking my phone, but there was nothing else. No figure in the kitchen. No footsteps, no shape standing in the corner, just me, alone in my apartment. I moved out the next day. I didn't pack carefully, didn't take everything. I left the cameras behind, left the furniture, left the lease. I just got out. But I still have the footage. I've watched it 100 times, trying to find what I saw that night, trying to prove I didn't imagine it. And every time I see the same thing. Me, sleeping. Me, waking up. Me, alone. But I know what I saw. I know it was there, standing in my kitchen, breathing, watching, waiting. And I know that when I checked the footage the next morning, there was 8 hours of video of me sleeping. Except I wasn't alone in the frame. Something was standing at the foot of my bed, just at the edge of the camera's view, watching me the entire night. Story 6. The knocking came from inside the walls. I work from home, so I'm used to noise, or at least I thought I was. When you spend 10 hours a day in the same apartment, you learn its rhythms. The radiator clicks in the morning when it kicks on. The floors creak when the couple upstairs walks around. The neighbors argue through the walls on weekends. It's ambient, predictable, the kind of background noise you stop noticing after a while. But the knocking was new. It started about a month ago, middle of October, right when the weather turned cold and the building's ancient heating system groaned back to life. I was sitting at my desk halfway through a work call when I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock from somewhere behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I muted my mic and looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. My desk is pushed up against the back wall of my living room, and that wall is shared with the apartment next door. I figured it was my neighbor, maybe hanging a picture or moving furniture. It happened occasionally. I unmuted and kept talking, but the knocking continued. Not loud, not insistent, just rhythmic, tap, 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 every few seconds, like someone gently drumming their fingers. I tried to ignore it, but it was distracting, pulling my focus away from the call. After about 10 minutes, it stopped. I didn't think much of it. Just a neighbor doing something on the other side of the wall. Normal. The next day, it happened again. Same time, same place. I was in the middle of answering emails when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I got up from my desk and pressed my ear to the wall, listening. The sound was muffled, distant, but it was definitely coming from inside the wall, not from the apartment next door. From inside the wall itself. I knocked back, 3 quick raps just to see what would happen. The knocking stopped. Silence. I waited, ear still pressed to the wall, barely breathing. And then after about 30 seconds, it started again. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm, the same pattern. I told myself it was pipes. Old buildings have old plumbing, and pipes knock when water runs through them. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. I went back to my desk and tried to focus. Over the next week, the knocking became more frequent. It wasn't just during the day anymore, it happened at night too, usually around 10 or 11 p.m., right when I was trying to wind down for bed. Sometimes it was soft, almost tentative, like someone testing to see if I was listening. Other times it was louder, more insistent, rattling the picture frame I had hanging on the wall. I started keeping track of it, when it happened, how long it lasted, where exactly it was coming from. It was always the same wall, always the same spot, directly behind my desk. And it was always the same rhythm, tap, 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 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. I asked my neighbor about it one afternoon when we crossed paths in the hallway. Her name was Lauren, a grad student who kept to herself. I mentioned the knocking, asked if she'd been doing any work on her apartment lately. Knocking, she said, frowning. No, I haven't heard anything. Why? I explained, keeping my tone casual, not wanting to sound crazy. She shook her head. It's not me, she said. My apartment's been quiet, maybe it's the radiator. I nodded, thanked her, and went back inside. But the knocking wasn't the radiator. I knew that. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Radiators clank and hiss, they don't knock. That night I decided to investigate. I waited until the knocking started, around 10:30 p.m. right on schedule, and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there and listen to it anymore. I went into the hallway and knocked on Lauren's door. No answer. I tried again, louder this time, still nothing. Maybe she was out. I pressed my ear to her door and listened. Silence, no movement, no sound. I went back into my apartment and stood in front of the wall, the flashlight in my hand, listening. The knocking continued, steady and patient. Tap, tap, tap. And then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I knocked back, 3 times hard, loud enough to rattle the drywall. And I waited. The knocking stopped. Complete silence. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for it to start again. But it didn't. The apartment was quiet, still like the building itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it. Not knocking. Laughter. Faint, muffled, coming from inside the wall. Soft at first, then louder, like someone was trying to stifle it but couldn't. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was sharp, grating, wrong. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The laughter continued for maybe 10 seconds, echoing in the walls, and then it stopped. Just like that. Silence again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment on, staring at the wall, waiting for the knocking to start again. But it didn't. The rest of the night was quiet. The next morning I called the building manager. I told him I'd been hearing noises in the walls, asked if there was any way someone or something could be inside them. Maybe an animal, I said, trying to sound rational. Rats, raccoons, something like that. He sighed, clearly annoyed, and said he'd send someone to check it out. 2 days later, a maintenance guy showed up with a toolbox and a look that said he'd rather be anywhere else. He poked around the wall with a stud finder, tapped on the drywall, listened with a stethoscope-like device. "There's nothing in there," he said, packing up his tools. "Walls are solid, no gaps, no animals. You probably just heard the pipes." I wanted to argue, to make him cut into the wall and look, but I didn't. What would I say? That I'd heard laughter? That something inside the wall was knocking back at me? He left, and I stood there alone in my apartment, staring at the wall. It stared back. That night, the knocking returned. But it was different. Louder, faster, tap, 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 tap. No pauses, no rhythm, just frantic, desperate knocking. Like something was trying to get out. Or get in. I left the apartment and didn't come back until morning. I stayed at a friend's place, told her I needed a break from work stress. She didn't ask questions. When I came back, the knocking was gone. The apartment was silent. But when I walked past the wall, I felt it. Cold air seeping out from a crack I'd never noticed before, thin and jagged, running from the floor to the ceiling. I moved out 2 weeks ago. I didn't tell my landlord why. I just broke the lease, paid the penalty, and found a new place across town. But sometimes late at night when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I hear it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. And I wonder if it's still there, waiting behind the walls, or if it followed me. Story 7. My dog wouldn't stop staring at the closet. I adopted Max about 2 months after my roommate Kayla moved out. She'd gotten a job in another state and left with barely a week's notice. And suddenly I was alone in this big, drafty house that had always felt too large, even for the two of us. The place was a rental, an old craftsman-style home on the outskirts of town, with creaky floors and high ceilings and windows that rattled whenever the wind picked up. Kayla and I had always joked that it felt haunted, but in that half-serious way you joke about things when you're not alone. Being alone changed everything. The house felt different without her, bigger, quieter. The sounds I'd gotten used to, Kayla singing in the shower, her footsteps padding down the hallway, the clatter of her making coffee in the morning, were gone, replaced by a silence that felt too heavy, too present. I started sleeping with the TV on just so I wouldn't hear the house settling, the pipes groaning, the wind scraping branches against the windows. That's when I decided to get a dog. Not a puppy, I didn't have the energy for that, but a rescue, something that needed a home as much as I needed company. I found Max at the county shelter, a medium-sized mixed breed with anxious eyes and a nervous disposition. The shelter volunteer told me he'd been surrendered by his previous owner. No explanation given. He was about 3 years old, housebroken, and spent most of his time at the shelter curled up in the corner of his kennel, avoiding eye contact. "He's shy," the volunteer said, "but he'll warm up. He just needs patience." I took him home that afternoon. He sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, his body tense and alert. I kept glancing over at him, trying to reassure him with soft words, but he didn't relax until we pulled into the driveway. The first week was fine. Max was quiet, anxious, skittish around loud noises, but he seemed to settle in. He followed me from room to room, never more than a few feet away. Like he was afraid I'd disappear if he wasn't watching. I liked it. It made the house feel less empty. But then he started fixating on the closet. My bedroom is on the second floor at the end of the hallway, and it has a walk-in closet that's way bigger than I need. Kayla used to joke that it was big enough to be its own room, and she wasn't wrong. It's deep, with built-in shelves on both sides and a single light bulb that flickers whenever you pull the chain. I kept my clothes in there, some boxes of old junk I hadn't unpacked yet, and not much else. The door was always closed. I'm one of those people who doesn't like leaving closet doors open, some childhood fear I never grew out of. Max didn't like that closet. It started subtle. I'd wake up in the morning and find him sitting at the foot of my bed, staring at the closet door, his ears flat against his head. At first I thought he was just being weird, adjusting to a new environment. Dogs do strange things when they're nervous. I'd call his name and he'd glance at me, then go right back to staring. After a few days, it got worse. He'd sit there for hours, completely still, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his throat. I tried distracting him, taking him outside, playing with toys, feeding him treats, but as soon as we came back upstairs, he'd go right back to the closet, staring, growling. I started to get uneasy. I checked the closet a dozen times, turning on the light, looking through the shelves, making sure there was nothing in there that could be setting him off. Nothing. Just clothes and boxes and the faint smell of old wood. I even looked for signs of pests, mice, rats, anything that might explain why Max was acting so strange. But I didn't find anything. One night, about 2 weeks after I'd adopted him, I woke up around 3 in the morning. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. Max was at the foot of the bed in his usual spot, staring at the closet, but this time his growl was louder, deeper, the kind of growl that makes the hair on your arm stand up. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to pound. "Max," I whispered. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring, his body tense, his teeth bared. And then I heard it. A soft creak, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards, inside the closet. I froze, staring at the closet door, waiting for the sound again. But there was nothing. Just silence. And Max growling. His eyes locked on the door like he could see something I couldn't. I told myself it was the house settling. Old houses do that. They creak and groan, especially at night when the temperature drops. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Max knew something I didn't. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I just sat there watching the closet door, waiting for it to open. It never did. The next morning I called a friend, Brandon, someone I'd known since college. I tried to keep my voice casual when I asked him if he believed in dogs sensing things humans couldn't. He laughed. "Like ghosts? Come on, Morgan." "I'm serious," I said. "Max has been acting weird ever since I brought him home. He won't stop staring at my closet." Brandon was quiet for a moment. "Have you checked inside?" "Of course I have." "There's nothing there." "Then it's probably just anxiety. Rescues can be weird like that. Give him time." I wanted to believe him, I really did, but Max wasn't getting better. He was getting worse. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of scratching. Frantic, desperate scratching like nails on wood. I bolted upright and saw Max at the closet door, pawing at it, his growls turning into sharp, panicked barks. I jumped out of bed and grabbed his collar, trying to pull him away, but he wouldn't budge. He was fixated, terrified, like something inside that closet was about to come out. "Max, stop!" I shouted, yanking harder. He finally turned, his eyes wild, and then bolted from the room so fast he nearly knocked me over. I heard him scrambling down the stairs, and a second later, the sound of glass shattering. He jumped through the living room window. I ran after him, my bare feet skidding on the hardwood, and found him in the front yard, pacing and whimpering, blood dripping from a cut on his paw. I wrapped him in a blanket and took him to the emergency vet, my hands shaking the entire drive. The vet stitched him up, told me he'd be fine, and asked if something had scared him. I said I didn't know, but I did know. It was the closet. Whatever was in that closet, Max had been trying to warn me. I didn't go back into my bedroom after that. I slept on the couch, kept Max with me, and avoided the second floor entirely. I thought about moving out, breaking the lease, but I didn't have the money, so I just stayed and tried to pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, because 2 nights ago, I woke up on the couch and realized Max wasn't next to me. I sat up, my heart sinking, and listened. And then I heard it, barking, upstairs in my bedroom. I crept up the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to get out of the house. But I kept going. When I reached the bedroom, the door was open. The closet door was open too. Max was inside, barking at the back wall. I turned on the light and saw it. A gap. A narrow space behind the built-in shelves, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through. And in the darkness beyond, I could see something. A pile of blankets, empty food wrappers, a phone charger. Someone had been living in my closet, maybe they still were. I grabbed Max and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, the doors locked, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I called the police from the driveway and they searched the house. They found the space behind the shelves, found the evidence that someone had been there, but whoever it was had already gone. I moved out the next day. I'm staying with Brandon now, trying to figure out what to do next. But Max won't go near closets anymore. And neither will I. Because every time I close my eyes, I see that gap in the wall and I wonder how long they were there. How many nights they watched me sleep. How close they were. Story 8. I found a sleeping bag in my attic. I'd been hearing noises above my ceiling for weeks before I finally decided to check the attic. At first, I thought it was animals, squirrels, raccoons, maybe even rats. The sounds were sporadic, mostly at night, and they weren't loud enough to really bother me. Just the occasional shuffle, a soft creak, the kind of thing you expect when you live in an old house. I'd bought the place 6 months earlier, a modest 2-story fixer-upper on the edge of town, and I'd been so focused on making the downstairs livable that I'd barely thought about the attic. The previous owners had left a ton of stuff up there. Boxes, old furniture, things they either didn't want or couldn't be bothered to move. The realtor had mentioned it during the walkthrough, said I could keep whatever I wanted and toss the rest. I'd glanced up through the attic hatch once, saw the clutter, and decided to deal with it later. There was always something more pressing to fix, more immediate work to be done. But the noises kept getting worse. They weren't just occasional anymore, they were constant. Every night I'd hear shuffling, creaking, the sound of something moving around up there. And it wasn't random. It was deliberate, like someone was walking. I tried to convince myself it was still animals, that maybe a family of raccoons had moved in and made themselves at home. But deep down, I knew better. Animals don't move with that kind of rhythm, they don't walk like people. I finally borrowed a ladder from my neighbor, dragged it into the hallway, and climbed up through the attic hatch. I brought a flashlight, a baseball bat, and a growing sense of dread I couldn't shake. The hatch was heavier than I expected, and when I pushed it open, dust rained down on me, thick and choking. I hoisted myself up, shining the flashlight around, and took in the space. The attic was bigger than I'd thought, stretching the full length of the house. The ceiling was low, and the single bulb hanging from a wire in the center didn't reach the far corners, leaving them shrouded in shadow. The floor was cluttered with junk, boxes stacked haphazardly, an old dresser with missing drawers, a broken chair, piles of what looked like old clothes. Everything was coated in dust, undisturbed, forgotten. I moved slowly, careful not to step on anything that might give way. I told myself I was just going to check for signs of animals, set some traps, and leave. But the deeper I went into the attic, the more uneasy I felt. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood and something else. Something faint and unpleasant, like sweat and unwashed fabric. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, behind a stack of old furniture, partially hidden by a dusty sheet. A sleeping bag, unrolled, laid out flat on the floor. I stopped moving, my flashlight fixed on it, my heart starting to pound. A sleeping bag, in my attic, not tucked away in a box, not neatly stored with the rest of the junk. Unrolled, like someone had been using it. I took a step closer, my breath shallow, and that's when I noticed the rest. An empty plastic water bottle lying on its side next to the sleeping bag. A phone charger plugged into an extension cord I'd never seen before, snaking across the floor and disappearing into the shadows. A small pile of granola bar wrappers crumpled and stacked neatly on top of a cardboard box. My stomach dropped. I crouched down, shining the flashlight over the area, and saw more. A paperback book, dog-eared and well-read. A flashlight, smaller than mine, sitting on the edge of the sleeping bag. A pack of cigarettes, half empty. And next to the sleeping bag, pressed into the dust, a clear imprint. A shoe print. Recent. I stumbled backward, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had been living in my attic, not animals, not a family of raccoons, a person. And they'd been there recently, maybe they still were. I swept the flashlight across the attic, my hands shaking, half expecting to see someone crouched in the shadows watching me. But there was nothing, just the junk, the dust, the oppressive silence. I turned and scrambled back toward the hatch, my pulse hammering in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to get out. I dropped through the hatch, nearly fell off the ladder, and slammed it shut behind me. I stood there in the hallway, breathing hard, staring up at the ceiling. Someone had been living up there, eating, sleeping, charging their phone above my bedroom, above my head. While I slept, I called the police. They came within 20 minutes, 2 officers who listened to my shaky explanation and climbed up into the attic with their flashlights and radios. I stayed downstairs, pacing, unable to sit still, my mind spinning with questions. How long had they been there? How did they get in? Had they been watching me? Listening to me? The officers came down after about 15 minutes. One of them, a younger guy with a serious expression, shook his head. "There's definitely evidence someone was up there," he said. "The sleeping bag, the food wrappers, the charger. But whoever it was, they're gone now. We checked the whole attic, no one's up there." "But they could come back," I said, my voice rising. "They could still have a way in." The other officer, older and calmer, nodded. "We'll check the exterior, see if there's a point of entry. Windows, vents, anything that could have been tampered with. In the meantime, you should change your locks, get a security system if you don't have one. And don't go up there alone again." They searched the outside of the house, checked the attic vents, the roof access, the windows. They didn't find anything obvious, no broken latches, no forced entry, but they did find something. A small gap in the siding near the roofline, just wide enough for someone to squeeze through if they were determined. It led directly into the attic. The older officer pointed it up with his flashlight. That's probably how they got in. You'll want to seal that up soon. They left after taking a report, told me to call if I saw or heard anything suspicious. I thanked them, locked the door behind them, and stood in my living room staring up at the ceiling. Someone had been living above me. For how long? Days? Weeks? How many nights had I gone to sleep completely unaware that someone was just a few feet above my head listening to every sound I made? I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house on, a kitchen knife on the table next to me, my phone in my hand. Every creak, every groan of the house made me jump. I kept staring at the ceiling, half expecting to hear footsteps again, to hear the sound of someone moving around up there. But the house was silent. The next day, I hired a contractor to seal the gap in the siding and install a lock on the attic hatch. I went through every room, checked every window, every door, made sure everything was secure. I bought security cameras, motion sensors, a full alarm system. I did everything I could think of to make the house safe again. But it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever had been living in my attic was still out there waiting. Every time I heard a noise, a car door slamming outside, a branch scraping the window, I froze, listening, waiting for the footsteps to start again. I went back up into the attic one more time, a week after the police had searched it. I needed to see it again, to convince myself it was empty, that whoever had been there was really gone. I climbed through the hatch, flashlight in hand, and swept the beam across the space. The sleeping bag was gone. So was the water bottle, the phone charger, the granola bar wrappers. Everything had been cleared out, like it had never been there at all. For a moment, I felt relief. Maybe they'd taken the hint. Maybe they weren't coming back. But then I saw it. On the floor, right where the sleeping bag had been, someone had written something in the dust. 2 words in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Thank you." I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. Thank you. Like this had all been some kind of game. Like they were grateful I'd let them stay. Or maybe it was a threat, a reminder. A promise that they could come back whenever they wanted. I moved out a month later. I couldn't stay in that house, couldn't sleep knowing that someone had been above me, watching, waiting, living in a space I didn't even know existed. I sold the place at a loss, didn't tell the buyers what I'd found. I just wanted to be done with it, but I still think about it. About the sleeping bag, the food wrappers, the phone charger. About the message in the dust, and I wonder if they're still out there looking for another attic, another house, another person to live above. And I wonder if they ever think about me, if they remember my face, my routine, the sound of my footsteps on the floor below. I don't live in a house anymore. I live in a 4th-floor apartment now. No attic, no basement, no crawl spaces, but sometimes late at night I hear a noise above me. A soft shuffle, a creak of weight on the floor. And I freeze, staring at the ceiling, knowing it's just the neighbors. Knowing it has to be, but wondering, always wondering if they found me again.